Hey, Mel.
Hi, Robin. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks. And what about you?
I'm doing great. And particularly recently, with the COVID restrictions going down and all that, I decided to go out to some museums and take a look and see what's there. And I am just floored that I have been to some of these same museums before, and I've missed things. I think I'm waking up to some things that I need to really spend some time on, having to do with our African culture. And I started reading this book by Carter G. Woodson. It's called The Miseducation of the Negro. And in it, he says, when you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him not to stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place and will stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back of the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, there is no back door. If there is no back door, he will cut one for his special benefit. His education makes it necessary.
Uh-oh. It sounds to me like it's time for real talk.
Yeah, it's time for real talk. I mean, my goodness, I can't believe that I've been to these museums and I've seen things and I've studied this and that, and I still am not educated in our African culture. And that's what Carter G. Woodson is talking about in The Miseducation of the Negro. I have one of the highest degrees you can have, and I'm still not educated in the African culture. And I saw so many things that I need to spend time looking at and understanding. Have you had the same experience?
That is incredible because I have. And yeah, I mean, yeah, we both love museums. Or is it musea? I always wonder. Anyway, yeah, we love museums. And I've visited a few as well. And I've been going back to bookstores too. And I've started reading this book it, called Know Thyself by Na'im Akbar, Dr. Na'im Akbar. And he refers to a lot to the miseducation of the Negro, by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. It's amazing. I mean, he this book was written in 1998. When was The Miseducation of the Negro written?
I know you won't believe this. It was written in 1933. Unbelievable.
It is, because it seems as though the same problems are happening. And but tell me more about what you learned at what you saw at museums and this thing with miseducation.
Well, the interesting thing is that I saw a lot of artwork that I didn't know about. I learned about Black towns that exist in the U.S., mostly in the southern U.S. states.
Mm.
I learned about uh, African culture and how it connects with African Americans. Um, I learned about the teaching in Africa and some of the customs we have here and things that we do now. It was just it was almost like opening a curtain and seeing things that I'd never seen before. And I think that's what Carter Woodson meant by miseducation. It's that education is not part of our standard educational curriculum about African culture,
No.
about African customs, about the richness of Africa and what Africa contributed toward the world history.
Absolutely. I, yeah, I've gotten a lot of education too. And I've heard about a few things. I would take some elective courses in college, which were fantastic, but they were Black history courses, but they were elective courses. Um, and so I learned a few things, but certainly I hadn't learned anything about uh, a lot of the contributions that Black people made, and a lot of the things that we've done. Last year I think ETT, the team, we did a show on Black inventors, and I was thinking, okay, this is going to be hard. I'm really going to have to dig here for this information, and this might not even be very much, beyond who was it? George Washington Carver, fantastic, amazing scientist. But I mean, a lot of people know about him, but I had never heard about Garrett Morgan, who invented the three-pronged traffic signal, 1923, or Sarah Boone, who invented the ironing board, or Onesimus, he was that was a name that was given to him by his owner, which I don't like to use that term, who taught about inoculations for smallpox back in 1716. There's so much to learn. And, I've taken a lot of courses. I'm a naturally curious person, I think. I've read a lot of books, but I just hadn't found any of this information. And certainly, I was just went to Greece last year. I hadn't learned anything about, I mean, I saw, of course, a lot of what I thought was Greek history, but I didn't know about the connection with Kemet. And that was something that I think you kind of brought to my attention, this concept, this learning about Kemet, which was the Greek name for ancient Egypt.
Yes, it's amazing. You were talking about, the Black inventors. I can go back now 40,000 years, 40,000 BCE to
Mm,
Kemet, Kemet. And Kemet was the ancient Egyptians, it's called ancient Egyptian civilizations, but really the name is Kemet. And I look at the people who studied at the universities and the educational systems at Kemet, and these are names that I know, but I didn't know they were connected to Kemet. For example,
mm.
Plato spent 13 years in Kemet studying, 13 years
No,
in Kemet.
really.
Yeah, Pythagoras, who was in philosophy and geometry and medicine and other things, spent 22 years in Kemet studying. I mean, it's just amazing. Hippocrates, who is supposed to be the father of medicine, spent many years in Kemet, and Imhotep, who was priest actually in Kemet, but he was the father of medicine, came up with the medical medicine as we know it today, 2,000 years before Hippocrates. I mean, it's just amazing what
So
I've learned.
Hippocrates learned from Imhotep's work.
He learned from Imhotep's work. Then he brought it into Western European civilization. And so he became, or at least we were told that he was the father of medicine. Imhotep, it was really the father of medicine 2,000 years before Hippocrates. I mean,
And that's a name that is just not thrown around. People that just don't commonly know.
it's just amazing. The whole idea of philosophical thinking was
Mhm.
derived from Kemet. It was, first there, and now it's in Western European civilization. I mean, I'm kind of like a kid in a candy store here,
Yeah.
just learning all these things about Kemet and what it had to offer and offered, and actually train these people who we now know or think of as the greats. But they got it from Kemet, which is a Black African civilization.
You know, I mean, that's really one thing I learned too. It's great to learn about our own history and about the contributions that we've made, because I mean that really helps to build our cultural identity, and that really helps to build help us to know thyself, as Dr. Akbar is saying, and that knowing thyself, self knowledge is really the basis for all learning. Well, I think we also didn't learn though about, how do I put it? So we learned a lot about white superiority. We were taught about white superiority. We were taught about black inferiority, and I should say mistaught. We were miseducated in those things. And to me, I mean, that's just I mean, that's not truth seeking or truth telling. And so we've been going around thinking, well, why is it that black people don't own a whole lot of property and that kind of thing? Well, because we don't learn about redlining. We didn't learn about how redlining affected black communities, and we didn't learn about the impact of slavery. In fact, we're told that yes, slavery was really bad, but it happened way back then. It was over in 1865, and then we rebuilt the country, reconstructed everything, and all that's in the past. We're also not learning about how 250 years of slavery, it still affects black people. We didn't learn about how redlining still affects black wealth and black multi-generational wealth. And we didn't learn about the revolts of enslaved people, because I remember when I was younger, I used to think, why didn't the enslaved people just revolt, leave, fight back? And we were told, well, they couldn't, but you know what they did? They did a lot, in big ways and in small ways. So I think this miseducation is hitting us and approaching us from so many different ways that we're told that, you know, everything that's coming at us, kind of confirms or suggests Black inferiority. And on the other side, we're hearing that about white superiority in so many different ways.
Well, I think that's true. I think that's true, and it's true then. It's true back in the past, and it's true today. We even talk about, or you hear it, on television, that things like the critical race theory,
Ah,
it
yes.
cannot be taught in the schools. The 1619 Project, which is a book which details slavery from 1619 forward, cannot be taught in the schools.
Right.
That there are certain books, if they kind of revere and explain and expose, African culture, those cannot be taught in the schools. So it's miseducation, but it's also almost like a carving out of history, that this part of history cannot be told, and the other parts that can be. So, know thyself. I think that's really, really important, that we've got to, we shouldn't have to, but we have to dig and get that information and understand what great people we came from and that we are.
In that we are. Yeah, you're right. And I know Dr. Woodson mentions that there are two kinds of learning, and one is where you learn from others, and the other is where you kind of teach yourself. Do you think that's true, or do you think one is more important than the other?
No, I think that is true, and I think we should, the ancient African history and our history, we should be able to learn in the schools, but it's been carved out. We it's just not there. It's only recently that you've had, like you said, African American studies in schools, but it's an
Mhm.
elective.
Yes.
And even as an elective, the history back to ancient Africa, Kemet, is not taught at all. So it's kind of like both things. I think you can learn, by doing from others, and you can learn, through the educational process. But what we have to understand is that the educational process that reveres ancient Africa and shows what really happened there, what kind of people our ancestors were, is has been carved out to make us look different than we are. So I think you can learn both ways, and I think we have, many of us, adapted. You go back to say Tulsa, the big business community, thriving banks, restaurants, libraries, schools, everything. And what happened? The white population burned it down so that it wouldn't be there as a model and for people to see, and for Black people to aspire to. This was all done by the Black people in the community.
Right.
Some were businessmen, some who had never gone to formal school like universities or colleges. Some were lawyers and doctors who had gone there, but they all coalesced together to make a community that where Black people thrived. This was burned down.
But then they also destroyed the record too, and that to me is just, hey, look, own up to it. You've done this terrible thing, own up to it. But instead, it's like it's not, for up until recently, it wasn't really even talked about. And it was almost mythologized within the Black community that, oh, I've heard about stuff like that, but is it really true, or is it just an urban myth or something like that? But these are really true things that happen, and that's destroying the historical record. And I guess there's a long history of that happening as well. But I think one thing Dr. Akbar mentions, he takes it a step further than Dr. Woodson. He mentioned something called enlightened segregation. And I know when we heard that word, segregation, a lot of different things come up, feelings and thoughts and opinions and all of that. But he said it's kind of an enlightened segregation in a narrow sense, to have schools where we can have more of an Afrocentric education, that teaches us about, African history and African languages, about culture and, foods, dressing, communities, how communities work together, learning centers, these things called imbongis, which were, almost, learning centers. And he says he compares it to, Hebrew schools, for many people in Jewish population, or Mormon schools, or even Kamehameha schools. But they said that people are willing to accept and actually even encouraging, the Mormon schools and the Hebrew schools. They get upset when you talk about people of color having their own schools too, that teach the culture and help keep that alive. But I think, well, we do have HBCUs, but he mentions that too. But he says that you got to get to the minds younger, to impress upon them, by the time they're, 7 or 8 or even 10 years old. By the time they're in college, they've already been miseducated, and then you got to spend a lot of effort re-educating. What do you think? I mean, you having grown up, under, segregation, in segregated schools and all of that. What do you think about his uh his idea?
Well, I think his idea is great. And I think, I agree that it should be at the level of young children because young children are, they are learning. They are learning and they are open and available to learn different things. And we've got to get them, together as a community. I think that's really important.
Mhm.
And to teach them about their rich African culture and history and the language too. You find this with other groups like Asians. They'll have a school after school, where they learn the language and the culture and that type of thing. I think we've got to do the same thing. I think it's very important that our children grow up in the African culture, and certainly they're going to go to college and universities and they'll get all that additional learning, but they will know themselves and they will know what great people their ancestors were and what great people they can and will become.
That is so true. But do you think this is just feel good stuff? Like, okay, it makes them feel better, it builds them up, and all of that, but it's just feel good stuff, but not really important.
I think it's extremely important. I mean, even at my age, and I grew up through segregation, as you mentioned. To learn this is like enlightening and inspiring, and it makes you want to just go out and read more and more and more, and to tell people about the accomplishments that from ancient Africa, that a lot of what we think is say Western European, um, uh, what should I say, was done by Western Europeans, actually initiated and started in ancient Africa. So to know that we have that in us, I think is very, very inspiring, and also shows that we have such rich background and such rich experiences and such a rich history that we need to make sure we know it, we understand it, and we live from it.
Wow, I really like that thought of living from it. How interesting. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. And I mean, I think of so many different ways that, and like we've discussed this with other experts, in ETT, and how we're constantly being bombarded with negative images and stereotypes and stereotyping and violence and threat and all of that. But I think, and all that's really important, extremely important. But it's also important for us to be able to build up our identity, to have that knowledge of self, because that will help us to fight back from that, to withstand all of that trauma that's coming towards us, from different directions. So no, I think it's more than just feel good. I mean, I think it is when you're building up someone's confidence, someone's self-esteem, you're building up a foundation. How can that just be written off as, a in quotes feel good kind of thing to do? And a P and PMA, or what's that, positive mental attitude, which is important, but it's it is more important for the child to know themselves and to know the greatness that they come from. And that's just not with Black people, that's with every people. But to us, to Black people, it has been denied and withheld. And this miseducation to me has almost been kind of education. I think I've always thought of it in the US as being commoditized, that it's been, withheld from people and, just given out to certain people, doled out in certain ways. But I think it's also been weaponized, because that quote that you read from Dr. Woodson, that we've almost been taught to, it's the miseducation has changed our mind in that we won't even try to go in the front door anymore. They don't even have to, tell us, hang up the, whites only sign on the front door. They just know that we're going in the back door, as Black people,
Mhm.
because of the weaponization of education.
Right. So that, if we had these schools or these educational centers for our children where we taught about the rich, African and ancient African culture, then they would have the armor, and that's what they need,
That's what.
armor to withstand the microaggressions and racial assaults and the racial battlefield that we talk about in many of our ETT, with many of our ETT experts. So, they need that armor, and that will protect them. And that's going to help with the physical health and the mental health of our children as they grow up.
Definitely, definitely. And then the right kind of education, when they get that, then they'll pass it on to their kids and they'll pass it on to their kids. It'll just it'll snowball. But instead, the miseducation is the things that make us feel inferior, are being passed on. It's I mean, it really upset me. But I will say this: I really am so pleased that I can go into these bookstores, or we can go into these museums and stuff and really get this information. I saw so much stuff like on Adinkra, symbols, and, about ancient Benin, which really upset me too. But yeah, but it also built me up thinking this has all been here and I didn't know it. And it's it's almost disgusting that we didn't get this in school. All that I ever got in school about Black history was that we were enslaved and then something about Martin Luther King, and having a dream. That was it. So, I think, well, I'm glad that I'm waking up to this. So, and that we can have a real talk about it.
Yeah, and I think this is really really important because, if you don't have that armor, you don't have that shield, that these microaggressions, these, being on the racial battlefield, all of these aggressions, that happen on a daily basis will continue to bombard us, and make us, ill, and create, problems in our lives. So we really need to get there and dig through this. And it's unfortunate you say, well, you can go to some of the museums, but you're really going to have to, uh, when you go there, go with, an open mind and see things that maybe have been mischaracterized, and get them in the right framework to read books and search for these books, and teach the children and talk about it in our community groups, so that we can build, what we need to understand that we came from and are great people, and no one can take that away from us. It's there.
Right. As hard as it's been, they've tried to erase the record. It's still there. So, but you're right. But it could be on us now too, and on our communities. You know, uh, but unfortunately, I'm really sorry. But I finished my espresso here, and actually, I even had a double. And I think I'm going to have to go. But I do want to this last quote. I think by Dr. Akbar, Na'im Akbar. I just want to read that really quickly, and then because we got to get out of here. It said, "Let us begin to think with our own minds and not the mind of the manipulators, and consequently free ourselves from miseducation." I think that really sums it all up. We
I
think
think
with
that
our own
says it.
minds. Yeah,
I think that says it. And I have to go too, but I have some books I've got to read here.
Okay. Well, it's been another great real talk. And yeah, and let's keep on learning. I mean, every day learning, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's just so much to learn. I mean, yeah, it's really kind of mind-boggling. I feel like I have been miseducated, and now I'm educating myself. So
Me
this
too.
this is the real way. This is real talk.
It sure is. Well, remember what else is real: strength, soul, and reparations. Bye for now. Ashe.